Always exciting. Okay. Family, it's your favorite queer radio personality, Anna Deshawn here, and it is LGBTQ History Month. And so I reached out to Amanda and I was like, Amanda, you want to do some queer history together? And she was like, yep. And so we're here sharing queer history. And if you don't know Amanda, please know she is your favorite queer public historian. And all she does is talk about queer history. So it ain't just an October thing. Okay, it's a 365 thing for Amanda. And
every month is Queer History Month at Yesterqueers.
period. And so we're sharing queer history with you this month. And it just so happens to also be Hispanic Heritage Month. And we wanted to honor that as well. So, Amanda, who are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about the first openly transgender soldier in Mexican military history. He was a colonel who fought under Zapata, and his name was Amelio Robles.
Wow. There is a person that was the first trans. What year was this?
So this was just the beginning of the 20th century. So he was born in 1889.
Wow.
And he joined the revolution in 1911 as a soldadera. And by 1913, he is living his true identity as a man, as Amelio Robles. And it's a little unclear what prompted that, other than, obviously he felt that he was a man and so wanted to embody that. Unclear what prompted it at that particular moment in time. But what's really interesting is that the reason he was able to transition is because he was sort of a stereotypically macho man. So there's a historian named Gabriela Cano who points out that he was readily accepted by his comrades because he ticked every box for like a macho soldier. He was an excellent marksman. He was an excellent horseman. He was an excellent strategist. He was a womanizer. He smoked cigars. He drank. And so it paved the way for him, because as soon as he revealed his true self as Amelio, everyone was like, oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, no, it's totally 100%.
So he had all the machismo. He embodied everything that he thought he needed to be to pass.
Yeah, which was a big thing for Zapatistas in particular. I actually did, and this is a whole other video, but there is some historical evidence that Zapata himself may have been bisexual, and I did a video about that. And the comments I received. Which I think is sort of a different conversation about why we think that him being bisexual makes him less macho. But anyway, it's a big thing among Zapatistas, and especially at this period in time. And so it's just sort of it's interesting that the reason this transition was so smooth for him was that he was absolutely that guy.
So this is kind of wild. I mean, we're talking before so many things ever occurred as it pertains to LGBTQ life here in the United States. I mean, this is
at least before they were well documented.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. Before they were well documented. I mean,
as you know, my tagline is, "We have always been here, and we have always been queer."
And there's no lie there. Yes, in 1913. I mean. And to think that he was enlisted already and then transitioned and embodied who he really was during this time. And then to be like, oh yeah, I'm fighting in this war. I'm fighting.
Yeah.
And I'm a great shot.
Yeah. And one of my favorite stories about him is that he was such a good shot that he didn't have to put down his cigar, and he would just shoot with his right hand and keep smoking with his left hand. And that mental image is just, it is perfection.
What? It feels like something out of a Wild Wild West movie. Are you serious right
now? Kind of. And so, and that's one of the things that's a little bit difficult in going into well-known historical figures, is to try and sort of pick apart, like, what is the myth that has grown up around them and what is actual fact. But as far as I can tell, the stories about him are so consistent that he just, by all accounts, he absolutely was that guy. And, and he was just an excellent strategist. And so he fought, he sort of rose quickly through the ranks of the Zapatistas. And he's recorded as participating in more than 70 battles. And by the time Zapata was killed, he had 300 men under his command. So it's not like he was like just some guy who was kind of on the fringes. They were like, oh yeah, that's Amelio, whatever. Like he was an officer within this military structure. He commanded hundreds of men. He participated in tens of battles. Like he was a key part of the revolution.
He was a leader.
Mm-hmm.
He was a leader.
Yeah.
And probably leading people who, if they knew who he actually was, would not have not only not accepted him, who knows what they would have done to him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm not sure he was parading it around, but like it was not any kind of secret that he had joined as Amelia and had become Amelio and then sort of risen through the ranks. So
wait one second, Amanda. So you telling me these people knew he was trans? These people were accepting of the fact that he was trans, accepting enough for him to lead hundreds of men through 70 battles?
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Absolutely. And so here's the part that's really going to trip you out because, I was telling someone this story once. They're like, well, it was war. So like, I get that, but I'm sure like after the war was over, then nobody just talked to him again. That is not what happened. So Amelio's ability to live as a man after the war was due entirely to all of his comrades from the war, because many of them got into high-ranking political positions, high-ranking military positions, and they paved the way legally for him to continue to live as a man, in all different kinds of ways, right? Like a false birth certificate somehow magically appeared in his military file. Nobody knows how or why, but a birth certificate appeared that said he had been born male, which he absolutely had not. But somebody put it there. In the 1940s. So after the revolution, recognition for Revolutionary War veterans was, and I think still is, a very big thing in Mexico, who got to be recognized for a variety of reasons, not just because it came with some tangible benefits, but just the honor of saying that like I was involved in this very important moment in our national history.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fight to be recognized was like a big thing. And it was a big thing for Amelio to be recognized specifically as a veterano, specifically as a male member of the revolution. So, excuse me, in the 1940s, he had to go and have his bullet wounds certified, sort of as like just making sure that, what he'd said had happened to him had actually happened to him.
Wow. Okay.
And the doctor who did his exam did not mention his gender anywhere in the exam. just left that part right out.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he was also, because of these friends and connections that he'd made during the war, he was admitted to the Socialist Party in Guerrero and something called the League of Agrarian Communities, both of which were very powerful organizations, and neither of which admitted women. So the fact that he was admitted to them, that reinforced the fact that he was a man. So not only did his comrades in the war know that he was trans and support it, they continued to support it after the war. So it wasn't just like supportive convenience, like we need his gun now, but as soon as this is over, we're done. Like they continued to go out of their way, and in some ways, I'm sure, broke laws to make sure that he could continue to live life as his authentic self. And that is actually the part that I think is the most remarkable. Because I think I've never been in battle. I hope to never be in battle, but I can imagine that like a lot of things happen in battle that you just let go because you're in it and that's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So it's the fact that after the war, they still acknowledged that he was a man and helped him continue to live his life that way. That to me is the part that's more remarkable.
I mean, that's really shocking, especially given all of the perceptions and ideas we have around Mexican culture and their acceptance or not acceptance, really, of queerness, right? It is a culture known for machismo, right? It's a culture known to align very similarly to Black conservative culture. Um,
Mhm.
they're known to be a conservative group of folks. They are Catholic through and through. Like, this is what we know, right, of Mexican
As was
culture.
Robles, by the way. He was Catholic
And
his
he
entire
was
life.
Catholic. I mean, how else you gonna pass? You better say you Catholic. And so I think, to your point, I think this piece around the fact that he was living his life authentically after the war, and the fact that these folks continue to befriend him. I'm like, did he have all the dirt on these people? Was he paying them off? Was he threatening them? Were they scared? He was coming for them with his gun and his cigar. Like, what? I wish we could travel back in time, Amanda, and talk to some folks around like how this all came about, and sort of this understood culture of silence around Amelio.
Yeah, and I think so. I think a couple of things are true. First of all, my favorite story about him that we absolutely cannot verify, so I am just passing on historical
I
gossip,
love
basically.
unverifiable information.
I
Yes.
generally don't, but I just love this story so much. Is that apparently after the war, so the story goes, a group of men attacked him to try and reveal his true gender, and he shot and killed two of them.
So that
Well,
might have been a thing. They said, "Oh, we ain't messing with him."
here's the thing. I'm just more inclined to believe that like it just wasn't as big a deal in 1948 as it would be now for a variety of reasons. Because I think, you know, all of these men that he served with who went on to become, you know, governors and high-ranking military officials and, you know, in the federal government, like they could absolutely have just turned their backs on him and there's nothing he could have done. Because think about the power dynamics of that. Like, even if he had dirt or whatever, if they have come out and said, this is a woman masquerading as a man, you know, she's just a freak, ignore her. Like, who's going to listen to whatever he has to say? You know what I mean? So they had all the power in that, in that exchange. Like, no matter what, they had the power, and
Yeah.
they used that power to make sure that he could just live his life unmolested as the man that he was. Um, you know, and I think it's remarkable, but also I look back to like my particular like super deep dive hole of history that I really, really love is the American frontier, which was crazy queer, like just so queer. But it's sort of the same thing on the frontier where it's just like stuff was queer and people just kind of didn't care. You know, they're like, oh yeah, that's Bob. You know, he used to be Sarah, but now he's Bob. And like, they just didn't care, or they didn't know and found out after death and were like, it just wasn't a thing, you know? And I think it's so important to remember that sometimes this stuff wasn't a big deal, right? Like sometimes it was just people living their lives and the people around them going, yes, you are living the life you are supposed to be living. Let us help you.
Not that I ever want to be transported back to that time, but I wish that they could come talk to their people today and remind
Man.
them to let folks just live their life. Wow.
Yeah. And it does matter. You know, as this historian says, like it does matter that he was the absolute epitome of everything a Zapatista was supposed to be,
Yeah.
right? Like he was, you know, he was brave and quick thinking and, um, you know, decisively violent. By which I mean that, like, if someone picked a fight with him, he was going to win it, you know, um, and you know, and believed in the cause and was honorable and you know was a womanizer and could smoke and could drink, and so like it matters that he ticked all of these boxes. He wasn't while he was alive anyway, was not in any sort of liminal space. No one would have looked at him and had any questions as to whether or not he was a man and what role he filled in the world. Like right down to the fact that as he got older, you know, and couldn't take as good care of himself, like the women in the neighborhood where he lived like took turns cooking for him and like bringing him food and stuff, like right down to that.
Wow. Oh man, I didn't even think about relationships, right? I can only imagine the
Mhm.
ladies that was lining up. I mean, a war hero, somebody
Yeah,
like a,
yeah.
a
He
shooter. I seen some pictures. He's a nice looking guy. I can only imagine the types of relationships he had.
Yeah, he married in the 1930s. He and his wife adopted a daughter.
Hmm.
Although that seems that both of those relationships seem to have not ended great. There's not a
Mm.
ton of like historical records around it, so um, you know, hard to say what happened there. But he did marry. They adopted a daughter, and so he had a very in some ways, he had a very stereotypical Revolutionary War veteran life, except for the fact that he was assigned female at birth. Um, there is also this like, there's this weird persistent rumor going around, not going around, going around in like historical circles, not like going around
I
on
was like,
Twitter.
Amanda, I don't think it made it to me yet. Okay, go ahead.
And it's, and I think it's sort of endemic of like, of, or I think it's an example of people trying to make sense of the fact that he was this hero and lived this life.
Mhm.
There is a sort of persistent rumor that on his deathbed, he asked to be dressed as a woman when he was buried so he could commend his soul to God. But first of all, there's absolutely no evidence of that. And second of all, he had lost the ability to speak at least a year before he actually died. So it's like, it seems like a weird thing that someone stuck in to be like, oh, but he wasn't really okay with it. At the end, he sorted himself, so it just is like a weird, but while he was alive, there's just really no question. Like once he had made the transition to Amelio, like there was no question about who he was and what he was about. But in death, weirdly, because his story's gotten a little muddled, he now sort of lives in this liminal space because after his death, so he died in 1984.
Oh, he lived a
And
long
then
life.
he did. Yeah, he did. He was 95 when he died.
Oh,
He lived a long life and he saw, can you imagine? I cannot, being born in 1889 and dying in 1984. Like just the amount of things that happened in that time period.
that's
Like,
a wild time. Like
yeah,
there was a lot that went on between that.
that just spanning that almost century
Yeah.
is amazing to me. But so after he died, his story got a little muddled for a lot of reasons. But now he is remembered in Mexican history as both the Coronela Amelia Robles and the Coronel Amelio Robles.
Wow.
And in his hometown, like yards apart, there's an elementary school named after his male name and a museum that honors him under his birth name. So in death, he does live in this liminal space where he's sort of remembered as two separate people.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you just know that's rooted in transphobia. And
Yeah.
to know that you still, in despite of that, wanted his name on your school also is just so
Yeah. It's
confusing.
like, wish I could have been in those committee meetings, right? Where it's like two clearly entirely separate groups of people are like, we are going to name this elementary school after this famous colonel who fought with Zapata, and then like there's a whole other meeting over here where it's like, we are going to honor this woman who was born here. And it's like, well, not a woman, but it's, yeah. So it's just,
The juxtaposition of it all. Uh,
yeah,
wow.
it's like a little bit transphobia, a little bit sort of like veil of history, kind of, or the mist of history, right, where things get a little fuzzy and it's like becomes like a game of telephone, as people are like telling stories,
Yeah.
generations on. So yeah, it's a very there's a the same historian who I keep quoting, Gabriela Cano, wrote a really great article about like the complexities of why Robles now exists in this liminal space of being both genders and no gender, sort of all at the same time. But while he was alive, he was very, very clearly the man he was always meant to be.
And family, if you get nothing else from this story outside of the fact that Amelio was clearly a badass, however people live their life is also how they should be recognized in death. This is my opinion, okay? Take it for the 2 cents that it's worth. Amanda, this was so dope.
Thanks. I try and bring the interesting stories.
This was next level, okay? Amelio, we speak your name here. Till next time.
And we're out.
Trying to find all the words. Say it in a way.
And I'm going to put them all in the right order.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Be fine.